I think we'll return some maturity to the debate around debt and get rid of what has become a phony debate every time the government has wanted to raise the debt ceiling. We have had the imported Tea Party style debate here in Australia, where the focus has been actually on the figure rather than on what the debt is being used to do. I think everybody is aware there's good debt and there's bad debt. And it's been very hard for Australians to see whether debt that the government incurs is being used in the way that people have for their mortgage. So it's a long-term investment for the betterment of the country. And that's the good debt. And of course that can be used for also economic stimulus. The bad debt, of course, is debt that is incurred to try and cover the gap between what revenue you can raise and what you spend. What we have now secured is an agreement that whenever the government passes a threshold of $50 billion increase in debt, that will automatically trigger a justification from the government by a tabling of a statement in both houses, which will then lead to a debate on why that debt is being incurred and whether it is to do with revenue losses, expenditure increases or expenditure for infrastructure or stimulus. We've also got much better reporting of the way that debt is shown up in budget papers, in MyEFO and other opportunities for the government to report not only to the Parliament but to the people of Australia through the Parliament. It's a good outcome. I think it's about time Australia really engaged this idea of what are we going to do to build the kind of country we want for the longer term. And that means using debt at a time when it is reasonable to be able to raise that debt in times of cost, to use it to be able to invest in those things which Australians know we're going to need in this century. It's also resolving it in this way and having it transparent, having a requirement for the government to justify it, means that the government can't use this issue of debt as a fig leaf for budget cuts next year. It'll be obvious to everyone what the situation is, and there is the capacity there for the government to borrow for the things that it needs to do in terms of economic stimulus and or infrastructure, and that should be clear to all and sundry. So this has been a good negotiation. The other thing that we have got is a recognition that climate change policy, if it is not going to be a market mechanism, is going to come out of the budget. And so there is an agreement that the government will report on climate change policy impacts on the Australian economy and the budget, not only in the immediate but also as part of the intergenerational report. The intergenerational report will come out next year. It looks out to 5 years hence, and that will have a section on the impact on the economy and budget of climate change policy out to almost 2020. So that is a good improvement too, so people can clearly see what not going to a market mechanism is going to cost in terms of the budget. Thank you. Did you want to add something?
Can I ask a question quickly? How does it feel to go from so-called economic fringe dweller to economic deal maker?
Oh, well, the Greens have always been at the heart of responsible economic management. It was the Greens who supported the Rudd government with the stimulus package, and it was the coalition at the time who walked away from it. And it has been the Greens have negotiated many times across the years institutional improvements like the Parliamentary Budget Office is a Greens initiative, and now we have, I think, gotten rid of Tea Party politics out of Australian politics. It was always a confected debate because in America the executive is elected separately, whereas here it's obviously the government, so it was always a silly debate. And it was made a silly debate by Matthias Cormann when he went to the United States and visited half a dozen of the Tea Party and came back with this idea that you could use it as a political weapon. It has been very destructive of the kind of debate. So instead of just ranting about debt, now people will be able to actually have a justification from the government and scrutiny of that debt, so there'll be much more clarity for the whole community.
You had quite a long letter from Joe Hockey, and you've had personal meetings with him to negotiate the outcome. Does this process change your opinion of the government in any way, that they're willing to negotiate with you and get an outcome with you?
Well, the Greens have always said we will work with whoever is in government on all sides of politics to get outcomes. This week we worked with the Labor Party supported us in disallowing temporary protection visas, and we have now worked to bring the government with us in terms of addressing the way debt is dealt with in Australia. So what I think it shows is that the Greens are leading and other people are coming along, and I'm very pleased about that, and I can sign you a photograph.
To confirm one thing, did you get all 4 of your conditions? Did you get everything that you wanted in?
Yes, pretty much.
What did you not get then?
I guess I would have liked some more specific detail around climate, but what I have got is specifics in relation to how it's going to impact on the budget, and there'll be further negotiations. And as the letter says, I would have liked to have had some of the financial institution reporting actually in it. What the government has agreed to do is to go away and see what's possible because of the commercial in confidence considerations, and so I have agreed that that is a reasonable thing to do, and we'll go back and have further talks about that at a later time.
Senator Milne, in respect of these automatic debates that occur when there's a $50 billion incremental increase, what is the status of those debates? Would it be possible for either house to disallow that that increase, or is it just a talk fest?
No, it won't be a disallowable instrument. It will be a ministerial statement to the Parliament to explain why the debt is being incurred, and that is specifically in relation to is it being used to invest in infrastructure or economic stimulus, for example, or is it being used because revenues have fallen? Is it being used because government has decided to increase spending on certain measures, or all three, and in what proportion?
But Parliament has no ability, has surrendered any authority in terms of yaying or naying this increase.
Well, what it means is that the debt will come through in the budget in exactly the same way as it did right up until 2008, and it will come through in the same way. But unlike what happens now, or indeed happened up until 2008, is that it's never been clearly enough presented for people to be able to debate the level of responsibility that the government has in terms of how it is spending the debt that is being incurred. Labor Party will suggest that this is about credit card. It has got far more to do with mortgage than credit card, because what it's saying is let's get it out on the table so that the whole Parliament can see what you are incurring good debt for and the extent to which you're incurring bad debt, and the community will judge that at the polls.
But Senator, how does, if government accrues debt and it goes into general revenue, precisely how are people going to understand, right, well, they've borrowed $500 million to spend on a pork barrelling exercise over there? Are people going to be able to have that level of detail?
Well, one of the things we have asked for and has been agreed by the government is that all loans and grants to states and local government will also be detailed. So whereas the Commonwealth doesn't spend a lot on infrastructure itself, it makes a number of grants and loans to other levels of government. That will be required to be reported, so it'll be very clear where and how that money has been allocated and what for.
Will this amendment go through tonight?
I don't expect it will go through tonight, but certainly I understand that we need to get it dealt with as quickly as we can, and it would be sensible to get on and do it by the end of the week, but let's see.
So your party was demonised in the last parliament by the coalition. Do you not see a sense of irony that you're now inside the tent with it?
Well, the issue is for them to resolve. When you go around calling people names, as indeed they did for a long time, that's a reflection on their level of maturity, not on a reflection on the people who are actually driving a really responsible outcome. And I think this outcome is going to be welcomed by everybody who for years have found it so difficult to understand what is going on in terms of budget papers and debt. So yes, clearly the coalition are going to have to rethink their views about the Greens as economic managers, but for those who've observed the Greens over the years, this is the kind of leadership we've brought to the parliament, with everything from the stimulus package through to the establishment of the Parliamentary Budget Office, and now bringing a good resolution for greater justification and scrutiny on debt.
Sitting in question time today, it was almost a bidding war between Labor and the Coalition as to who could mention the Greens the most often, and I think what you're seeing is that throughout this all, while Labor and the Coalition flip-flop depending on who's in opposition and who's in government, debt all of a sudden becomes fantastic or it becomes evil, we've been arguing a consistent position for some time, and it's had the support of quite respected economic commentators, and it's the right position, and when it comes to debt it's the economically orthodox position, and now people are starting to realise that from across the parliament.
Senator Milne, are you expecting any recriminations from Labor? I assume that they'd be fairly disappointed with the decision made today?
Oh, well, Labor can answer for themselves, but it was Chris Bowen who introduced the notion of a debt ceiling in 2008. Up until then, debt had been handled through the budget process, as it will continue to be. But he never ever justified in 2008, when he introduced it, why they brought this American concept, which isn't a match for Australian politics, into being in Australia. I think that what we have done is a really mature response to a debt debate in Australia, and it actually creates the space now for the community to have that sensible debate on debt. And I think right across Australia people are saying, when are we going to build the infrastructure we need for this century? And the Greens are saying, well, now you'll be able to have that infrastructure built, it will be transparent, and the government will have to justify it. And I think that's the sort of debate that people want us to engage in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.